In the summer of 1911, a 10-year-old girl walked away from her home at noon on a Tuesday, and by nightfall her father pulled her body from a pond on Chobham Common. Her shoes and stockings were sitting on the bank, undisturbed, as though she had simply stepped out of them. She had severe injuries to her head, and no one, in all the years that followed, was ever held accountable. What made it worse was how ordinary everything had been that morning. Not just ordinary, forgettable. The kind of day that people in Long Cross Village had lived through hundreds of times without incident. The days in Long Cross were long and slow, seemingly untouched by the outside world. Lanes narrow and well-worn. Most families had occupied the same plots for generations. Neighbors knew each other's business without needing to ask, and doors were left unlocked as a matter of course. Morning routines unfolded in overlapping rhythms. Fires lit, kettles boiled, gardens tended, and Amy Reeves was as constant a presence in that village as the common itself. Nobody watched because watching implied suspicion, and suspicion had no obvious target here. Arthur Reeves held the household together through sheer habit. A working man who left in the mornings and came back in the evenings. He had the kind of steadiness that comes not from confidence, but from not having been tested yet. His wife Esther had died just before Christmas the year before, leaving him with two daughters, Amy, 10 years old, and her older sister Ethel, who had absorbed the household duties that grief and youth between them couldn't manage. Meals were modest. Hours were predictable. Each day resembled the last, which is both the comfort and the curse of that kind of life. Amy Margaret Reeves had been born on the 27th of November, 1900, in Chertsey, Surrey. Light brown hair, 10 years old, 3 years from the end of compulsory schooling and whatever came after it. But that Tuesday, the 18th of July, she wasn't thinking about the future. She was in the garden with Albert Hampton, doing what children do on slow summer mornings. Burning time, boiling water over a small fire, making nothing in particular out of the hours. Ethel watched from inside the house. The biggest event of that morning was the kettle. Sometime before midday, Amy came inside and told Ethel she was heading to school. Ethel said goodbye. The door closed. That was the last confirmed moment Amy Reeves was seen alive by anyone who loved her. School finished at 4 o'clock. Amy did not come home. Ethel waited the way you wait when you don't yet have a reason to panic. Half convinced there's a simple explanation, half aware there might not be. She waited past the point where lateness felt innocent. By the time the light had begun to soften and Arthur Reeves still hadn't come home, there was nothing left to do but stay and watch the road. He came home around 8 o'clock. Ethel told him immediately. Amy hadn't returned. What moves through a parent at that moment, when possibility collapses into alarm, is not something that leaves a trace in official papers. Arthur Reeves organized a search. Neighbors came without being asked twice. They pushed through the village lanes and into the trees and out across Chobham Common, calling her name into a warm July dark that should have held nothing more threatening than the sound of insects. Arthur Reeves found his daughter in a small pond on Chobham Common. She was face down in the water. Her shoes and stockings were on the bank, not tossed aside, not scattered in a struggle, but sitting there with the stillness of something deliberately left. The grass around the pond had been pressed down and trampled. Arthur Reeves could see, even before he reached her, that she had been attacked. The injuries to her head were visible. They were not small. He pulled her from the water while the neighbors stood somewhere behind him in the dark. Nobody moved toward him. There are moments that belong to one person alone. We have no way of knowing what he said or whether he said anything. What we know is what happened next. A doctor was called, an examination was conducted, and the evidence that came out of that examination would shape every question asked in the weeks that followed. Dr. Hodgson's post-mortem was precise. Injuries above the right eyebrow, on the crown, toward the back of the skull. Later testimony would raise the count to 4 wounds in total. His conclusion was measured. The blows alone had not killed her. They had been enough to render her incapable of standing. The cause of death was drowning. Someone struck Amy until she couldn't hold herself upright, and then the water finished it. 2 versions of that sequence exist, and the difference between them is not minor. In the first, a stunned child stumbles forward and falls into the pond on her own. In the second, someone guides her in or puts her there. Dr. Hodgson could not say which version was true. He could only account for the body. What the pond also gave up, once investigators looked, was a stick. 2 feet long, birch, with light brown hair pressed into the bark. Consistent with Amy's. The stick had been used and then submerged. That much was beyond argument. Everything else, whose hand held it, what preceded it, what followed, was where the case began to fracture. Suspicion landed on Albert Hampton without much delay. 15 years old, local, a boy the Reeves family knew well enough that his presence in their garden that morning had required no explanation. Investigators began reconstructing the day and found a sequence of details that each seemed to point somewhere, but which collectively refused to arrive. Ethel told them that at some point after Amy left for school, Albert had seemed off. Agitated, maybe, and he had been carrying a freshly cut stick. Flora Batchelor had also seen him that morning, stick in hand. When she asked what it was, Albert told her it was cherry wood. The brand from the pond was birch. That single discrepancy became the fulcrum of the case. A boy who cut his own stick and then misnamed the tree. It was specific. It was the kind of detail that doesn't feel like a coincidence. But it is not a confession, and it does not prove anything beyond the fact that at some point in that Tuesday sequence, something in Albert Hampton's account did not line up. And while everyone in Longcross was watching him, there was another figure who had passed through that morning and never fully explained himself. A man on a bicycle had stopped at the Reeves property and asked for water, identified afterward as William Scammell, a painter from Egham who said he was looking for work and had moved on to Fairview. That sounds clean enough, a tradesman passing through, nothing sinister in it. But look at what it actually means. A stranger stops at the home of a child who will be dead by nightfall, on the same morning she dies, during the hours when no one can account for her whereabouts. He was in the area. He was on the move. He saw things. Whether investigators pressed him on what those things were, not just where he went, but what he noticed along the lanes and near the common, is not something the surviving case papers answer. He was questioned, apparently cleared, and the focus returned to Albert. Whether that pivot was earned or merely convenient is now impossible to say. Professor Pepper, one of the most respected forensic specialists of the era, was brought in to interpret what the physical evidence meant. His reconstruction was grounded entirely in what the scene itself could tell him. The body's position, the water depth, the disturbed ground. Amy had most likely been standing in the pond when the first blow landed. Someone on the bank, striking down into the shallows. The blows came fast. She went forward. Meticulous work for 1911, and still it could not produce the one thing the case required. A name. Albert Hampton was arrested. At the moment officers reached him, he said, "I'm sure it was not me, sir." At the station, given another opportunity to speak, his answer was recorded as a single word. No, he was 15 years old. In August of 1911, the law did what it was designed to do, examined the evidence and found it insufficient. Coroners, sworn testimonies, expert analysis, jury deliberation. The jury's finding was unambiguous, a deliberate act. Not an accident, not misadventure. Someone had killed Amy Reeves. But the jury could not name that person. The evidence traced the shape of a crime without filling it in. And without a name, the legal process had nowhere left to go. Albert Hampton was held, then bailed at 25 pounds, then discharged entirely on the 4th of August, 16 days after the body was found, as further inquiries produced nothing. No charges followed. No one else was ever arrested. The courtroom doors closed. No trial would come, no sentencing, no moment of formal accountability. What remained was a document classifying the death as an unattributed intentional killing, filed away while the people most damaged by it went home and tried to work out how to keep existing. Arthur Reeves returned to the house where Amy had been that morning. Ethel returned to the same house. Think about what those days actually looked like. Every breakfast at the same table. Every evening in the same rooms. No verdict had drawn a line between before and after. The loss simply continued, unresolved, the way unsolved things do. It doesn't compress into grief and then recede. It stays present. It becomes part of the furniture of every ordinary day that follows. The people around them face their own version of the same problem. Neighbors who had known Albert Hampton had to arrive at private conclusions the law had declined to reach. Those who had cared for Amy had to move through the same streets, past the same edges of the common, without the relief that resolution might have offered. Long Cross didn't break apart. Small places rarely do. They absorb violence and carry on, which is a kind of resilience and a kind of cost at the same time. Newspapers at the time noted the verdict and moved on. What they could not print was what the village had become, a place that held a question it could not answer, in a season it could not forget. The case against Albert Hampton was built from pieces that each meant something and together meant almost enough. The birch stick bearing Amy's hair, his description of it as cherry wood, his proximity to her on that last morning, his demeanor in the hours after she disappeared. Remove any one of these details and the others weaken. Keep all of them and you have a pattern, suggestive, persistent, troubling, that still falls short of proof. In 1911, as now, that gap was unbridgeable. Whether the law's verdict of insufficient evidence and the truth of what happened on Chobham Common are the same thing is a question no court ever had to answer. Legal proceedings close. The underlying question does not. One piece of evidence has resisted resolution across every reading of this case. Amy's shoes and stockings were on the bank. The most straightforward interpretation is probably correct. It was a hot July afternoon, and a 10-year-old near water would naturally pull off her shoes and step into the shallows. Children don't deliberate about these things. But if she waded in on her own, then whoever struck her was standing close enough to watch her do it. Close enough to wait. That image, a child in ankle-deep water on a summer afternoon, someone behind her on the bank, is where this case becomes genuinely hard to sit with. Professor Pepper's reconstruction is consistent with exactly that scenario. It cannot confirm it. The physical evidence draws the outline and stops. The record gives us the what and the where. It cannot give us the why. Amy was buried in Surrey, 10 years old. She had spent her last morning boiling water in a garden with someone she trusted. Most of what made her who she was, her favorite games, what made her laugh, what she hoped September would bring, died with her simply because no one wrote it down while she was still here to be written about. Her name survives in a birth register, a school roll, and a coroner's report. That is the sum of the official record of her existence. We don't have Amy. We have an account of her last day and the statements of people standing at the edge of her story. Her actual life, the years before that Tuesday, exists in none of it. Albert Hampton walked out of the legal process in August 1911 without a conviction. Whatever that summer cost him, whether it cost him anything at all or whether it cost him everything, was never established in any court and cannot be established now. William Scammell passed through Long Cross on that Tuesday morning, stopped at the house of the child who would be dead by nightfall, and then moved on. The questions his presence raised were acknowledged and then set aside. They were never fully answered. So here's the timeline, stripped to what the evidence actually confirms. A girl with light brown hair left her home in Long Cross at noon on the 18th of July, 1911. She told her sister she was going to school. She never arrived. Her classmates confirmed she had not been there. She was found that evening in a pond on Chobham Common, a birch stick nearby with her hair on it, multiple wounds on her head. The jury called it deliberate. No one was ever charged. Chobham Common still exists, 1,400 acres of Surrey heathland, walked by people who have no idea what happened there. Whether the pond is still recognizable is impossible to know. There is no plaque, no marqueur, no acknowledgement of any kind. The ground holds nothing it is obliged to show. More than 110 years have gone by. The investigators, the witnesses, the neighbors who stood in the dark that night beside the pond, all of them are gone. Whatever was known in Long Cross on the 18th of July, 1911, known, suspected, concealed, or simply never seen, went with them. What remains is a jury finding, a post-mortem, a handful of testimonies, in the name of a child who walked out a door one summer afternoon and didn't come back. Two possibilities remain, and neither can be closed. If Albert Hampton was innocent, he lived for decades under a suspicion he didn't deserve. And if he was guilty, he took the truth to his grave, and it has been buried there ever since. The case of Amy Margaret Reeves was ruled a deliberate killing in 1911. It has never been solved.